It was early morning when I arrived at Aokigahara Forest. Tree roots and moss grasping all in their silent embrace. A thin layer of mist still lying over Lake Fuji before the sun had a chance to burn it away. The rich dark soil and bed of leaves beneath my feet seeming to dampen all but the nearest of sounds. All the while, the mountain above remained strangely clear. Its gargantuan peak completely dominating the skyline when I'd gone up to the observation deck at my lakeside hotel before breakfast. Enjoying there my first up-close meeting with that snow-peaked monster at the heart of the Japanese national identity. Only later did I learn that this isn't always so. The seemingly omnipotent Fuji-san by no means always revealing itself to passers-by. Having already seen it clearly from the plane as I came into land at Tokyo a few days earlier, and then over and over again aboard the sprawling train network of the Central Highlands, it never even begins to get old. There's just something special about that mountain. Always has been. At 3,776 meters, it is the tallest in all Japan. A sacred titan of gods and mortals, standing sentinel down the centuries. Since its fiery creation some 100,000 years ago, when the heavens stretched their fingers down to the earthly realm. It has remained a muse to poets, a beacon to pilgrims, and now the heart of a nation. Once considered a god in itself, for millennia the silent giant has watched the march of history unfold around it. From the first fires kindled and pots created by Jomon hands as much as 15,000 years ago, to the samurai who sought solace on its slopes in the last millennium. From the Shinto and Buddhist monks who traced its ridges in search of enlightenment, to the artists who immortalised its form in ink and woodblock. Fuji has borne witness to the ceaseless movements of time. Today, it is memory itself, carved in rock and snow. And it is still alive. All the meteorologists agree. Its last eruption in 1707 will soon be followed by another. But the mountain's shadow is long, and beneath its towering form lies another realm entirely. An emerald labyrinth of gnarled roots and trees, where the wind is hushed to silence, and the past seems to linger. Also known as Jukai, the Sea of Trees. The forest of Aokigahara is many things. To interested travellers like myself, it is a cradle of folklore, a place intrinsically linked to the story of the Japanese people. To others, one of whom I would meet that day, it is a place of darkness and death, a kind of danger tourism hotspot. To yet more, it is a refuge of solitude within only a few hours of the dizzying bedlam of the largest metropolitan area on Earth. And finally, to a solitary few, it is a place where life meets a quiet end. For there is darkness beneath this ancient canopy. Aside from the popular tourist caves that can be found throughout, and the many easy bus routes from the idyllic lakeside resorts like Shoji and Fuji, Aokigahara has another name: the Suicide Forest, a place where men and women from all over Japan have come for centuries to slip silently away and rest eternal amidst the trees. As far as Japanese folklorists are concerned, as well as many followers of the traditional Shinto faith of the islands, an immensely old religion, Aokigahara is far more than just a forest. It is a liminal place where death and life entwine. Past and present, legend and reality coming together in the shadow of a leviathan of the elder days. For those of this persuasion who dare to enter, it is a place that never truly lets go. As I entered the forest that day, following the carefully laid out pathways and meeting many friendly faces along the way, I couldn't help but think of the old stories of the place. Of the Yurei, wandering spirits trapped between our world and the next, drawn to the darkness in Aokigahara's depths. Like most traditional folklores around the world, though few survive anywhere near as completely as a place like Japan, tales of demons and spirits lurking in the trees of wilderness areas such as this are common. Calling out in the night, echoing through the labyrinth of moss and stone to lead travellers astray. But there was more to this forest. For in times of famine and hardship, it is said that people, old or weak, or in some way perceived as a burden to the rest, would go to the forest to die, sometimes leaving their souls behind in its embrace. If you are of this way of thinking, then even today, as modern roads pass through this vast expanse of green, the spirits of the dead remain, perhaps adding their collective essence and energy to the woodland. Though those who were angry when they died, or had unfinished business, remain to haunt the place as dangerous Yurei. But just as there is death, there is life here too. The 35-kilometre area of Aokigahara is considered one of the most significant biodiversity hotspots in all of Japan, in fact. With several species of rare butterfly and other animals found in abundance, more than anywhere else in the central regions. Though you wouldn't know it due to the all-pervading silence. Vast amounts of animals are to be found. Including Asiatic black bears, raccoon dogs, and wild boar. This is not surprising at all for me, for the ground I walk on as I enter the forest is clearly of volcanic rock. As much as this is a place of endings, it is also a place of rebirth. Not just in the Buddhist conception of rejoining the cycle of existence after death, but in biology, for the entire forest has grown up on top of a lava bed of over 1,000 years in the past. It was during that eruption of 864 to 866 AD, recorded in the Nihon Sandai Jitsuroku, that the lakes of Motosu, Shoji, and Saiko were formed, when the vast lava flow separated a larger lake. Molten lava having spewed forth down into the water at its base, transforming the landscape into a network of chasms and caves, formed deep below the surface, changing the landscape and surely the psyche of the people around it too. Valleys were filled in, life eradicated. What a sight it must have been. The impact of the eruption being so severe that a shrine at Asama was established in the foothills to ward off any further eruptions. And yet, though Fuji's biggest eruption in recorded history, the immensely fertile new ground led to the forest and life we see today. By the 12th century, though the power of the volcano survived in memory, enough in itself to create a whole slew of myths and legends, enacted in songs and dance, and perhaps contributing to the dark reputation of the place, it was deemed stable enough for Satsudai Shonin to establish a temple on the very summit. Worshippers regularly climbing as part of the syncretic religion of mountain worship known as Shugendo. As is common in Japan, a mixture of Buddhism with more ancient ideas. Even with strong winds above, as I wander in the woodland, it is particularly quiet. Amidst the silence, I remember the supposedly strange characteristics of the place. Magnets and watches not working properly, for example. A quick check reveals these to be traveller's tales. And though I can perceive an eerie, otherworldly feel. The place feels like many other forests I've been to. However, the giant trees that have grown up so densely over the last 1,000 years sometimes make it feel like dusk, even though it's the middle of the day. The foliage and the volcanic earth consistently blanketing every sound. With no carefully maintained tourist paths in pre-modern times, the ground itself would have seemed booby-trapped, with roots that threaten to trip up or grab out at all but the most observant of wanderer. But what of the forest before the eruption? Before the volcano destroyed the land? Before newer trees and stories with them grew thick and tall? Before their tangled limbs wove a barrier between worlds? This land, of course, was already ancient, and Fuji-san remembers. Around 11,000 years ago, an earlier eruption had caused a vast amount of lava to form the entire west side of the mountain we see today, completely altering its image. This was an age when Japan's first complex societies shaped clay with fire, painted their bodies with ochre, and constructed impressive monuments on the landscape. Hunting, gathering, creating art, and wandering. During that distant age, we know now as the Jomon period, due to the elaborate knotwork on their ceramics. The forest was a place of awe and reverence. More connected to the land due to their subsistence from it, those first inhabitants of Japan must have known the mountain was restless. The land itself moulded by its breath. For thousands of years, the complex hunter-gatherers of the Jomon period didn't just live here, but thrived all through the central highlands of Japan, to the slopes of Fuji itself. In those days, when the wild wood coated all the earth, the hunters enjoyed intimate connections with the world around them, playing music, creating art, and perhaps, like some still do today, feeling a presence in every rustling leaf, a being in every shifting shadow. They carved strange patterns onto stone, fired great masterpieces in clay, and in what was once assumed to be a unique case for people living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, came together to create mighty, monumental architecture. At the southwestern edge of the mountain, one of their archaeological sites can still be seen. The settlement of Oshika-Kubo, found when roadworks were being carried out in the 1990s, unfortunately can't be seen overground today, but has nonetheless been investigated archaeologically, dating to some 15 to 12,000 years ago. It is just one example of a complex society that spread over all of Japan for millennia. We don't know for sure, but some facets of the Shinto religion that survives in Japan today may in fact stem all the way back to these wildly early people. Still immensely popular in Japan today, due to their seemingly peaceful, idyllic even existence. Finally, by around 300 BC, everything would change. After tens of thousands of years of isolation, rice farming would arrive on the Japanese mainland. And almost immediately, when this new and intensive way of creating food swept across the islands, wealth accumulation, elite rule, and violence came with it. This age, known as the Yayoi, most famously seen in the bronze bells that line museum shelves across the country, seems to be accompanied by a new Chinese-style religion. Way of life, and population groups. Though no doubt some older Jomon ways survived too, ultimately merging to create Shinto. It is in the period that follows, beginning in the first few centuries AD, and only ending with the arrival of Buddhism by the 6th century, most famously known from its colossal elite funerary monuments. That the Japan we know today has its roots. This was the age of the Kofun, a time of rising empires and warrior kings. When great tumuli, earthen pyramids, were built to house the mighty in death. The rulers and elite of this land, adorned with bronze, silk, swords and armour, were buried in chambers that in many cases, not being allowed to be investigated, slumber still beneath the soil. If the Kofun had a presence around Fuji, Aokigahara likely then being a place of reverence, just as it is today. And perhaps a border even then between the living and the lost. It lies buried deep. Perhaps those kings and queens of old still drift as unseen sentinels amidst the trees. By the time Buddhism arrived in Japan in the 5th and 6th centuries AD, many of the characteristics we associate with the later age of the samurai were already in place. A quasi-feudal system of haves and have-nots, and the institution of the emperor among them. One such facet of Japanese faith, seeming to long predate the arrival of Buddhism, is the Obon festival. first recorded as having been celebrated under the Empress Suiko in the early 7th century. Still celebrated every year in August, all these centuries later. The original festival likely took place twice a year, in spring and autumn, always on the night of a full moon. Intrinsically linked to ancestor worship, not too dissimilar perhaps to ancient religions all over the world. The intention of the celebrations was to beckon the deceased home, to their family houses, to pay homage. In order to do so, families will traditionally return to the lands of their ancestors, cleaning the household altars while there, and taking part in a dance known as Bon Odori. According to the old religion, when a person dies, their soul, or Raikon, leaves the body to enter a kind of purgatory. If the deceased died a good death, and the proper funerary rites are performed, they may rise to join the exalted ranks of the ancestors. Watching over their descendants and returning each year during the Obon festival to receive thanks. If a person suffers a violent or sudden end, however, or has strong unresolved emotions like anger, a desire for vengeance, jealousy, intense sadness, and even love, or even if the proper funerary rites are not satisfactorily performed, the Raikon will not be freed from its earthly cage, nor allowed back into the cycle of reincarnation. Transforming instead into a Yurei, a dangerous spirit or ghost. These Yurei are often associated with a particular place. And of all those places, the most Yurei haunted of all is none other than Aokigahara Forest. Sometimes, the more harshly an individual was treated in life, or the lower the social rank they held, such as Oiwa in Yatsuya Kaiden, a tragic ghost story of betrayal and revenge, or other figures of Japanese literature, will lead to the return of an especially powerful Yurei. If the proper rituals and/or emotional conflict suffered by the individual are never resolved, the spirit will remain on Earth forevermore. Lashing out at the mortal realm and leading to the especially morbid reputations of Yurei-haunted landscapes like Aokigahara Forest. While waiting for the bus back into town, its driver shattering my perceptions of punctual Japan by being an hour late, I met a young metalhead from Taiwan. He'd studied Japanese at university, he told me, links apparently remaining strong between these two East Asian allies of the United States. I told him how I'd read of the folklore of Jukai. He told me he'd done the same, but he was here for something more, he said. He'd left the paths to go searching for a body. No doubt many other visitors do the same. The grim reality is that Aokigahara is the second most popular suicide destination in the world, only the Golden Gate Bridge being more popular. Though, as we have seen, the forest has over 1,000 years of recorded history to draw from, much of its popularity in the last century in fact stems from a single work of fiction. A 1960 novel by Saicho Matsumoto by the name of Nami no To. In English, Tower of Waves. Though this nihilistic masterpiece of post-war malaise mostly takes place in Tokyo, its finale, where its beautiful heroine takes her own life, is, of course, in Aokigahara. Turned into a movie within a year of its release, and followed by new adaptations every decade since, Tower of Waves was an absolute phenomenon in its day. Unfortunately, hundreds of bodies recovered from the forest have been found with the book on their person in the decades since. Other wildly popular books in Japan, like Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami, also contain suicide. Understandably, authorities in Japan stopped releasing figures of those who lost their lives in the forest a long time ago. It isn't that Japan is particularly rare in the world in its rates of self-inflicted death. The mythic concept of ubasute, where the infirm are left in a wild place to die, and shinju, lover's suicide, being similar to the Greek tragedies and Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, for example. But the reasons that some go down this route remain very unlike those in the West. Imagine if the Greek tragedies had taken this concept alone and ran with it forever. The self-inflicted seppuku committed by samurai, for example, as well as the kamikaze pilots of World War II, are unlike anything seen in the West. One argument is that the cooperative nature of rice farming in East Asia leads ultimately to a collectivist culture in Japan, and in the other areas of China and Southeast Asia where it predominates. By this reasoning, wheat and grain growing areas, on the other hand, tend to be more individualistic, so can lead to individualistic cultures like Europe and the United States. Unlike in the West, in Japanese culture, the self is deeply connected to the communal. Social mechanisms historically valorizing rather than abhorring suicide as a worthy act if committed for the benefit of others. From salarymen who no longer wish to suffer the indignity of unemployment, or who have made a grave mistake in business, to elderly folk wishing to remove their perceived burden on their descendants. Innately hierarchical structures, led by invisible networks of obligation and deference, have traditionally acted to bind Japanese society by a code where self-inflicted death can be the ultimate heroic act. all the way back in 1897, just as Japan was opening up to the wider world. Sociologist Emil Durkheim investigated this concept, which he called altruistic suicide, finding it present in many cultures on Earth. From early legends where self-immolation in particular was praised, to the semi-legendary ubisate of the 18th century, where elderly or the sick chose their own deaths to make way for the next generation. This tradition of self-sacrifice has verifiably existed within the Japanese psyche via myth and written works for centuries, perhaps even millennia. Potentially being brought with the first rice farmers over 2,000 years ago. With self-inflicted death often being framed positively as the removal of responsibility. Even today, through the lens of Japanese cinema, theatre and literature, we can see these traditions personified when describing the romantic acceptance of voluntary death. Quite simply, it has become entwined with what it means to be Japanese. In recent years, however, the forest has developed a particular reputation for the dark. With many locals apparently shunning the forest. Some even believing that merely entering the place can cause mental anguish that will ultimately lead to suicide if left unchecked. Arguing that the negative energy of the many thousands who have died here to have infused with the trees to create especially dangerous yurei. Today, the human brain is widely considered the most complex structure in the entire known universe. A machine for the creation of meaning, which neuroscientists still barely understand. With this in mind, and given the history of places like this, it is no surprise that certain locations, like the Aokigahara Forest, seem to conjure up feelings of malevolence for large numbers of people. Many locations the world over having developed either positive or negative reputations down the centuries, very often seeming to exist outside the realm of the human mind. Back in the early 20th century, concerns such as these inspired pioneering psychoanalyst Carl Jung to ask the question, can a landscape have memory? Or alternatively, does a landscape have a soul? Linking his question to the concept of the collective unconscious, and his mentor Sigmund Freud's idea of archaic remnants left over in human groups. His resounding answer was yes. Certain places may become imbued with a sense of soulfulness due to the intense meanings placed on them by human cultures. Though some of Jung's ideas are considered pseudoscience today by many, this concept of a sacred landscape has become especially popular in academia in the last few decades, with investigations into how certain landscapes can influence human activities being undertaken in many disciplines. It has been argued that a sacred landscape is not simply what we see with our eyes, particularly for someone outside the cultural frame of reference, but a way of seeing with our minds. Ultimately, this is the concept at the very heart of the ancient Japanese Shinto faith, as well as most other animist religions all over the earth. A kind of Shintoism once having been practiced by all humans. Including my own ancestors in ancient Britain and Ireland. In those days, absolutely everything was imbued with a spirit, some considerably more powerful than others. Still worshipped at thousands of shrines today. Though often left purposefully ambiguous, these kami worshipped in Shinto can refer to animals, the souls of the dead, former emperors, forces of nature, landscape features, forests, people of particularly outstanding deeds and virtue, powerful gods and goddesses like Amaterasu, the sun goddess, the moon goddess Tsukuyomi, the storm god Susanoo, and vaunted ancestors. Shinto remains a fascinating and particularly well-developed insight into the ways ancient people throughout human history very likely viewed the world around them. Having been added to many times over the centuries, particularly by Buddhism, the heart of Shinto remains intact. In particular, the idea that upon death, people can essentially be incorporated into the animist forces of nature. Many peoples all over the world still have their sacred mountains, for example, places of numinous power, whether they realise this is the case or not. Originally, they would likely have been seen as individual entities. In Japan, the relationship between these kami and natural places like mountains, but also trees, rocks, and waterfalls, designated as such by priests with traditional ropes and strips of paper, has led to the establishment of thousands upon thousands of shrines. Some wildly ancient. Though anyone can put one up. And sometimes they do, particularly for lost loved ones, creating symbiotic relationships between the shrine and the natural world. Some today are in built-up environments, even the middle of massive cities. But originally, all would have been in a place of natural beauty, transforming topographies, to living graveyards. If anywhere can hold memory or a soul as young ponders then, surely it is here, in this most sacred of places, in a land where the past never truly sleeps. To those of a Shinto persuasion, already psychologically prepared to feel a certain way when they arrive, the forest is a powerful place indeed, where the earth whispers, time slows down, and the wind carries voices long forgotten. Light and shadow weaving their endless dance amidst the murmurs of history. Myth and the unseen world beyond. As an outsider in the sea of trees, I find not darkness, but peace. A place of stark beauty, of solitude and serenity. I stare upwards to the canopy and venture forwards into its depths.